Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so before we begin, as always, whenever we teach, give some charity. Put a little charity in a tzedakah box. We are people of action more than faith. Make sure you put a little bit of charity. I want to make a suggestion that today, any charity that you give, either give it to a Holocaust organization in honor of the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt, which started today, or give the charity, not today, it started April 19th, 1943, or give it to Food Share Ventura County. There's a link in this handout, and they are doing amazing work. They have fed 30,000 people in the last 3 weeks, and it would be fabulous if we were giving charity to those people and to that organization. It'd be a really wonderful thing, and it's what we need to do, and it helps our study as well to give charity. I'm going to ask for forgiveness because I'm really confused by having this many people in Zoom, and I'm confused generally, so I'm definitely confused in this. If you have a question, then raise your hand, and when the moment is right, when there's a pause or something, and I can unmute you, hopefully. So forgive me if not, because I am not exactly good at this, as many of you know. Hopefully you've downloaded the notes. The notes are found on the website. You need to have them with you. It will make this a lot easier. They are rather detailed notes. They took a lot of time, but they're very, very detailed about everything. So again, please download the notes. If you don't have them, you can get them right now. David, maybe you can. David's here somewhere. I know. I just don't see him. David, you're there, right? There you are. David, maybe you can put where the chat is or something, a link that they can download if they don't have.
We have chat turned off. Can't do that.
Okay, never mind. But on the website, please get the notes. It will make life exponentially easier. I want to be clear on a couple of points. And this is really, really important. When we study and we disagree in Judaism, this is a good thing, because as we learn in Bat Mitzvah 59, God is infinite, and we want to have disagreements. People should have different thoughts and different systems. In fact, it was in the Talmud times, the times of the Sanhedrin, if the entire assembly of the Sanhedrin was unanimous in any decision, the decision was thrown out, because they figured there's no circumstance where 71 Jews are going to agree on everything, on anything. So it's good to have disagreeing opinions. And we want to respect all the different opinions. What we're going to do today is to understand information on two very, very specific issues. And there's a majority opinion, there's a preponderance of text that sides in one direction. There are minority texts that side in a different direction. Every person needs to find their own conclusion, their own place, their own feeling of what is right, and their obligation, responsibility, and rights. The most important thing is to be able to deepen our relationships with each other. And this virus will pass, but the relationships you don't want to destroy because you disagree with someone, whatever you base your opinion on. I will tell you that some of you know that myself and another pastor and some other people as well are now joining in on it, demanded of Ventura County that they should let religious organizations legally assemble up to 10 people the same way they do other essential businesses. And that got a fair amount of press, which I'm not particularly happy with, but it did. Both that and when we first announced that we were going to do this class, which I had thought of 3-4 weeks ago. I said I wanted to do a class on religious rights and the virus, specifically, after Pesach, I wanted to do this class. And this idea of demanding Ventura County to change their laws only came up in the last week. When we announced the class, when press came out, I cannot tell you the amount of vitriolic hate mail I have received, as well as messages from people personally attacking and truly the vitriol. And that's not Jewish. People who I've served their families for funerals and other things, just really nasty emails. And I've invited all of them to talk, and they just won't. And it's very sad, and we need to remember what the important piece is that we wrestle with God, we wrestle with our text, but the goal of it is to bring relationships closer together. The goal of it is to bring ourselves to a deeper awareness of God, and we don't attack other people. If you think someone is wrong, you think they are wrong. That does not mean you think they're evil. And so we're going to present a lot of information. You can do with it what you want to do with it. Hopefully, we'll give you a take on one side and another side. So whatever side you stand on, you can understand the other side's discussions. Is that fair? When I ask a question like, is that fair? If you can all give me a thumbs up, then I know you're actually here and listening. If that's okay. So that's I think really important. It's also important to realize that tonight is a very, very important. This date is a very important date. On April 19th, 1943, was the first time in 2,000 years that the Star of David flew as a flag. Because it was the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And where they decided on, it was the Erev Pesach, and they decided on that time they were going to start the revolt, and they held off the Nazi terror machine longer than the entire government of Poland, and they held off. It was the biggest defeat to the Nazi propaganda machine of the entire war, because people saw that these, quote, subhuman Jews could in fact be there. David, I have a question for you that's a technical question. I can only see 25 exactly frames. If there's more than 25, I just don't see them. Is that accurate?
You have your mouse over the 25 or whatever frames. There should be to the right a 1 of 2. If you click the arrow, you'll see more people, and then you can click back.
Oh, if I click the arrow, I'll see more people. Oh, I see people. Oh, I see. Okay. Got it. Okay. That's going to make it difficult to see everyone who wants to ask a question or a comment. So I'm going to trust.
I'm monitoring. I'm monitoring both screens.
Okay, you got both. Okay, so it's okay, Orlando. He's got it. All right. So that the most important thing is relationships are more important to understand where different people stand. You can disagree with someone. That does not mean you may think they're wrong, but they are not evil. That's not Jewish. And it's really, really important that we remember that. As it is equally important that we give charity. And again, I want to really encourage everyone, both in honor of the Shoah, the Holocaust, and in honor of the teaching today, the charity that you give to the food share of Ventura, because they have, as I say, they've doled out 30,000 meals in the last 3 weeks to people who need them. Charities to the synagogue, you should always be doing. But for this especially, give some charity. So I hope you have your handouts. I hope. And we're going to, there's some guidelines. David has muted everybody. Okay? He is looking at you. If you have a question, then you're going to need to raise your hand, and he either will unmute you, or if I see you, I will unmute you, etc. But no one's going to be rude to anybody. That's just not going to be allowed, as it is in all of our classes. There is an order to what we study, and it's a specific order, and so there's a reason I've put it in the order we put it in. And hopefully by the end of the class, we'll all know that. We are only going to deal with 2 issues. Okay, the issue here is religious rights and obligations in the time of crisis, specifically in this case of COVID-19. We are not going to deal with the medical aspects, the health aspects, the danger aspects, all of which are real. A, those numbers or that information is constantly changing. B, I saw that Jeff Klein was here. I thought he's a doctor. I'm not. I can't even pronounce epistemologist correctly. So we are only dealing with 2 very, very specific issues and in one very specific circumstance. One of the understandings when we learn Talmudically, when we learn how to argue, when we learn how to dialogue, is that we really make it clear that what is the exact issue we're looking at, what's the exact environment. This is how we study, how we learn. We don't bring in hypotheticals, we try and make it as small as we can, and then from there look at other small pieces, okay? We are only dealing with these 2 issues. Not dealing with the medicine about this, not dealing with LA County, not dealing with Orange County, not dealing with New York or anything else. We are dealing specifically with the rights and responsibilities, and you find this on page 2. The rights and responsibilities of religious organizations and individuals as defined by the Constitution, Founding Fathers and Framers, and the subsequent judicial understandings. Spend a little bit of time on that. And then the Jewish understanding of responsibilities and rights of the individual Jew and the Kahal, the sacred community, which may include but is not limited to the concept of pekuach nefesh, saving a life, the halachic, the legal obligations, the ethical responsibilities about protecting others, obligations to defend the weak, relationships between Jewish law and civil law, and all these things. And part of it's going to depend on how quickly we go through this. Feel free to just start eating or drinking if you're hungry, by the way. You don't have to worry about that. It's good to study and eat and to nurture yourself at the same time. We are only going to discuss these two issues, very specifically and only within the context of Ventura County and the Ventura County orders of the Public Health Order, Public Health Office. The laws are different in different counties, in different states. There are lawsuits going all around the country. Just yesterday, a judgment came down in Kansas, where a law that is almost verbatim to what the law is in Ventura County was struck down by a federal judge. We'll talk about those kind of things, but we're only looking at it in terms of Ventura County. That's the location of our synagogue, and it is the specific venue we are looking at. All right, so this is not a dialogue about the whole country, the whole world. It's not a dialogue about medicine. It's a dialogue and a teaching about constitutional law. It's a very small part will be constitutional and legal law regarding religion, and the majority of it will be about Jewish rights, responsibilities, obligations as both an individual and as community. Okay? So, and again, if you have a question to chime in, please raise your hand physically. We've taken off, I guess, that David's taken off the ability to raise your hand in another way. So raise your hand physically. Okay? This class is not about trying to convince anyone to go on anyone's side. It is not about government conspiracy against religion, God forbid. It is not about any of those things. We're very specific, 2 issues, the constitutional and the Jewish law within the framework of Ventura County. Okay? And again, this was the plan almost a month ago to do this. Okay, so I hope that's clear with everyone. Hopefully by now you've all downloaded this document. Orlando's seeing apparently text messages, so he's laughing. I don't know what the text message is. If anything's really interesting that's a question, pop it out to me. Okay, if you also are texting Orlando, you can do that too. All right, let us turn to page 4 in the handout. All right, before we discuss the constitutional law or the religious law, we need to discuss and see what is the framework, the context, the world within which we're working. We are specifically dealing with Ventura County law. Therefore, this is the most recent orders up until the orders they made last night. We'll talk a little bit about them at the end, but this is the orders up until last night. Okay? And it's very, very specific, and these are direct excerpts. When I put it in italicized or highlighted, that's my doing it. That's not in there. But this is very, very specific, okay? And normally we'd go around the room and we'd all read this, but it's probably easier if I just do that all, right? Thumbs up on that idea, is that okay? Thumbs down, Lou was saying I wanna thumbs up on everyone? Okay, so we'll do, where did Misha go? Misha's floating around, there he is, okay. Okay, so these are the health orders of April 9th, that is the most recent one until last night. They supersede and supplement the orders of the March 17th, 20th, and 31st. Okay? Failure to comply with these orders is a misdemeanor punishable by a fine, imprisonment, or both. Okay? And let's go into this. Number 3, all gatherings are prohibited, notwithstanding any other order. All public and private gatherings of 2 or more persons occurring outside a single household or living unit are prohibited. So the order says initially, more than 2 people, you can't be together, period, and report. I do know that changed last night. It's 6, but again, we're looking at this document. 3a, gathering means and is defined as any event or convening that brings together two or more persons in a single room or single space at the same time. Now, you may have already realized that that inherently is a challenge because there's a difference between all of you being in my living room, all of you being in our sanctuary, and all of you being at Dodger Stadium. But it's based upon room size, not upon square footage. So it shows a lack of wisdom just in that, but that's fine. Including but not limited to any other indoor or outdoor space used for non-essential purposes, including but not limited to movies, church services, swap meets, or similar purposes. We come under the category of church services, whether it's Catholic, Christian, Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, Muslim, that all is considered part of church services. So by definition is saying that church services are non-essential services. Okay? And forgive me if I use church a lot, because it's used that in the civil way. Okay? Number 3c, nothing in this section prohibits an event or convening that brings together two or more people as necessary to operate an essential business. So, by this order, two or more people can get together if it's an essential business but not non-essential, and religion has been considered in this order to be non-essential. And here lies a big problem. It says in 3d, gatherings of 10 or fewer persons are permitted at graveside funeral services. So the process at this local cemeteries is we have 10 people, there are no chapel services, they are held outdoors, they have 6 feet distancing between the chairs. We don't use the shovels, but some people do, but most of us aren't using shovels, we're having people put the earth by hand. You can have 10 people at the grave for a funeral. Ironically, we can serve the dead as clergy for a funeral, but we cannot serve the living for a bar mitzvah, according to this law. Okay? But let's just look again at what this was saying. Staffs or organizations, associations, including faith-based organizations, may gather together in a single space for the sole purpose of preparing and facilitating live stream or other virtual communications, and then it goes on, no event excess of 7 people, the fewest staff necessary. So they're saying we can videotape it, but we cannot do it live. Then it goes on, the following subsections are added to the list of essential businesses. So essential businesses, which are listed elsewhere, grocery stores, hospitals, infrastructure. They've added bicycle repair and supply shops. Cannabis clubs are also part of the list. Service providers that enable real estate transactions. So real estate agents are essential. Bicycle shops are considered essential according to Ventura County, but not synagogues or churches. Limiting the number of persons who can enter the facility and work areas at one time. Ensure that persons in the facility and work areas can easily maintain a minimum 6-foot distance from one another at all times, except as required to complete the essential business activity. So if you're an essential business, you can have 10 people, but you have to abide by the law of social distancing. You have to provide hand sanitizer, soap, etc. You got to clean and disinfect. Okay, and goes on with the compliance. And the number 9, this is page 5. This order will continue to be in effect until it is extended, rescinded, superseded, or amended in writing by the health officer. So it is an order without end. Okay, so it's an order for our purposes. It's saying religious organizations are non-essential. Other organizations are essential. And if we look on a little farther on page 5, and these are excerpts from the March 20th, it talks about different things that are essential. 10 persons can be, on number 5, it says 10 persons who are not part of a single house or living unit are prohibited except for gatherings as part of the operation of an essential business. So you can have 10 people for an essential business. Essential business include healthcare, licensed healthcare facilities, which by the way includes by definition cannabis clubs, mental health providers, veterinary care. It does not include fitness and exercise gyms, aquatic centers, and similar facilities. And then we go to page 6. Persons may leave their places of residence, provide any service or perform any work necessary to the operations and maintenance of essential infrastructure, which means and includes, and it goes on with a whole big list, but funerals and homes and cemeteries are on it. So what Ventura County's order, which is by the health officer, Dr. Levin, is basically these orders, and again, this is not last night's, it's changed a little bit, but these orders are, you cannot be in a gathering of more than 2 people unless you're an essential business. If you're an essential business, you can have 10 people. And it's very clear, bicycle shops and real estate agents and cannabis clubs are all essential businesses, and they by name specifically say church services, including synagogue services, are non-essential. Okay? That is how they have defined it, which is their right. That's what they've defined it in this order. If you understand all that, please give me a thumbs up on the screen. Okay, so everyone understands the situation that we are in, yes? Stephanie, you got your head's way down there, so you got to go like this. All right. Okay, let's now, so we understand the venue we're playing with. We're playing only in the context of this order, these orders, this law, this county. Only true with these. Now let's take a look at page 6, so constitutional background and setting. It says in the Declaration of Independence that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Jefferson and Adams had a big fight whether it was inalienable or unalienable. The idea being that there are certain rights that are not endowed by the government, but are given to us by God, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, this is why governments are instituted among men, and it says very specifically, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The government, according to our Constitution, serves us, not the other way around. If we do not like something going on in the government, we should do what we need to do, voting, lawsuit, judgments, protesting, electing new officers. That is our obligation. It is not the government's obligation that we should monitor them. It is our obligation on any right, on anything. It's very clear that's even from the Declaration of Independence. Madison said all powers originally vested in and consequently derived from the people. Jefferson said governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. In other words, it is our responsibility as American citizens, if we see something being done that is not appropriate, to change it, i.e. the civil rights movement. That's the perfect example. The government was way behind the curve, to use a common term, way behind the curve in terms of what they were doing, the persecutions they were doing. And the laws changed and the government officials changed because the people made it change. Okay? It is our right and responsibility. And for those of you who do not know, some of the earliest proponents of the civil rights movement were the Jews. The ACLU, there's a wonderful picture of Dr. Martin Luther King walking hand in hand with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, blessed memory, an Orthodox rabbi, amazing mystic and teacher. And when Heschel was asked, what were you doing walking with Dr. King? His response was, when I march with Dr. King, I am praying with my feet. It is a Jewish obligation, not a right only, but an obligation, that if we see something being done wrong, we should try and correct it. So it is our obligation, and as it was in the 60s, it was our obligation that there was a civil right being violated and the persecution against blacks. And thank God, many of our organizations and individuals stepped up and said, no, we're not going to allow this. We march arm in arm. Okay? It is our obligation to do that. We, the people, are ultimately responsible for protecting individual liberties. Franklin left the 1787 Constitutional Convention. He was asked whether republic or monarchy was going to be established, and he replied, republic, if you can keep it. Franklin was actually a Jew at heart. And the idea is that he had to, it's our responsibility. This, again, is only looking at it from the constitutional background. Our framers were always clear that there must be a balance between public safety and individual liberty, and we're also clear that this balance should never be determined by just one person or one government official. That's why we have two houses. It's why we have the legal system, the court system. It's why we have the executive, legislative, and judiciary branches. That one person should not be able to say, this is the law for all the people. Everyone follow me on that? So I'm going to periodically ask for thumbs up to see if people are, yes? If you got a question, raise your hand. I can't see everyone, but I can see some people. This is one of the challenges we have with this Ventura County order. The definitions of essential businesses were unilaterally made by Dr. Robert Levin. I don't know Dr. Levin, but the decisions, he unilaterally decided this is an essential business and this is not an essential business. This is a problem in terms of, we're just looking at the constitutional law aspect. This is a problem in terms of one individual deciding what's essential, what's non-essential. That real estate agents and cannabis clubs are essential and that a church is not. So there's a problem with that on its face. Okay? I'm sure and I'm grateful to him on so many levels. He is doing the best he can, and this may have been an oversight at one point when he wrote this, that he hadn't thought about those kind of things. They're trying to juggle a lot of things, and we need to be very kind and considerate to all of the governmental officials who are trying so hard in this challenging time. It's so important to do that. That being said, it's not, I don't expect him to know everything or to think of everything, but as it says in the Declaration and the Constitution, it is up to us to say, hey, doctor, did you think about that? Makes sense if we see a right not being done. There's something called RLUIPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which was passed unanimously by Congress in 2000, which, again, Congress rarely does anything unanimously. Turning to page 7, RLUIPA determines that, quote, the right to assemble together for, and it's all based, let me explain, RLUIPA is law, it's federal law. The states can have state law, but they cannot have state law that is antithetical to federal law. We are a republic, and you cannot do that. There's a civil war about that. But they are very, very clear in this, that this law is federal law. So it's part of what we do. They determine the right to assemble together for worship at a physical location to be the very core of the free exercise of religion. And this was a joint statement of Senators Kennedy and Hatch, probably the most liberal and conservative senators in the Senate at the time. So RLUIPA was created based upon the idea that it's an extension from this constitutional law. The way we have Talmud, and we have Tanakh, and then we have Talmud, and then we have commentaries, etc. U.S. law works the same way. This is just an extension based upon First Amendment rights. Someone is texting me. I have no idea why, but so I'm going to check just to periodically see if it's someone who can't get in. Someone's texting. I should be kind to real estate brokers. RLUIPA explicitly requires courts to construe, and this is a quote, in favor of a broad protection of religious exercise to the maximum extent permitted by the Constitution, and that any county or state order must impose the least restrictive means of furthering the county or state's interest. By definition, therefore, RLUIPA holds religious organizations to a at least restrictive standing among other organizations in business, making it essential by legal definition. So this is a problem. It means that when the order says that churches are not essential, that's in violation specifically of RLUIPA, number one. But it also says something in this. As part of RLUIPA, however, a religious organization is not guaranteed extra rights, right? It says the least restrictive means. It doesn't say they get extra rights. So churches and synagogues must abide by all the restrictions and obligations placed upon other businesses. If other businesses can have 10 people, a church is not entitled to have 50 or 100 or 500 or 1,000. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes? Okay? There is the right, RLUIPA gives the rights, but it also gives the obligation. It does not say that churches have the ability to do whatever they want. It says that to the least restrictive possible. Okay? David, are you seeing any questions? Because you see more people than I do. David, yes, no?
There are no people with hands up. If you want a question now, raise your hand.
You got to raise your hand if there's a question on this so far. Physically raise your hand. We're good, David?
Everyone's...
Okay, we're going to keep moving on now. We're still on page 7. The First Amendment to the Constitution prohibits, quote, government actors from enforcing any law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay, so the Constitution guarantees that the government cannot prohibit the exercise of religion. Free exercise of religion and freedom of assembly is guaranteed even in the most dangerous of times. Quote, and this is from 1905, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, when faced with a society threatening an epidemic, a state may implement emergency measures that curtail constitutional rights, so long as the measures have at least some real or substantial relation to the public health crisis. A violation of an individual's constitutional rights, even for minimum amounts of times, results in irreparable injuries. So, churches do not get to go do, synagogues do not get to go do whatever they want. And it's clear here. especially in times of an epidemic or of danger. They don't just get to do whatever they want. And, on the other hand, at the same time, they cannot be restricted any more than the most liberal or most least restrictive process. David has a question. David, was that a question? David Boris? Are you waving or are you?
Fred has a question. I unmuted Fred. You can talk.
Go ahead, Fred.
Hi. Is it possible that the doctor had some financial gain in mind, meaning that the bicycle shop and cannabis will bring in money and synagogues don't for the county?
So remember, we started at the very beginning saying that we are only looking at very specific issues. First of all, none of us can ever know anyone's intent, number one. Number two, we're only looking at specific issues. Why he is doing this is not consequential. In the same way that we would not say there's a financial reason, we would not say there's a health reason. We're keeping that out of the dialogue. This is just about this order and both the legalities of it and the Jewish legalities of it. Okay? So I can't comment on that one way or the other. Any other questions? Or David, when someone has a question, they'll raise a hand and David will translate. Because I can see David. All right. Orlando has a question. I'm never going to get through this. 20 pages.
Arnold has a question.
Arnold Gross.
Arnold Gross has a question. Arnold, yeah.
My concern is that there have been showings of clusters from religious services.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that.
But under our lupa, though, it would seem to allow this type of restriction.
No, it doesn't.
As long as, again, I'm not looking to argue, I'm looking to express an opinion,
right,
as we all should do.
Right, so it doesn't, our lupa does not protect the shmegegis who want to put 100 people in a church service. They cannot use our lupa to say, because make sure he's unmuted for a second, David. Arnold, that's kind of your question, right? That these churches are using religious law to say, well, we can gather 500 people or 2,500 people or whatever, right?
No. It's
okay.
That even smaller groups together, since they are from diverse area in a county, can present a transmitter of the disease, which is the reason to have electronic or Zoom presentation. I've got a daughter-in-law who's a rabbi who's doing her services strictly by...
So I'm going to ask you to hold that thought. I'm going to ask you to hold the thought and come back to it a little bit later, okay? Because we're going to get to that. Is that fair? Wait, did I lose Arnold? Tell me I didn't lose Arnold.
I'm here, but
okay.
If you don't want me to talk anymore, that's fine.
No, I have nothing on the mutes. I want you to come back to that in a little bit later. Is that fair? Because what our lupa is doing is saying you can have to the minimum restrictions, which means that if a group of 10 can gather, a group of 10 church can gather. It does not mean that a group of 30 or 50 or anything else can gather, and we're only dealing again with Ventura County. Now you're asking a question about Jewish law with Zoom. That's why I'm asking if you can ask it again later, because I want to get to it.
And I'll get the Zoom fine. The other part of it, however, is in the time of pandemic, there is the need for some restrictions that may seem to step on various rights, but are needed for the public good and the health of the public.
So what our lupa is saying, and what the Constitution is saying, is that when it comes specifically to religion, it must be the least restrictive possible. So if any other organization can do it, our lupa is saying, so can the church. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that's what the federal law is.
Except our lupa does not say church is essential service. That's being read in by the way.
No, that's not true.
Defines religious institution.
No, that's not true.
That statute, I did not see it as an essential business. I'm a lawyer myself.
So let's get through this, because I want to keep going through and keep coming back, because we're going to have a lot of text in here, because you are a lawyer, so you can look at it as well, okay? And you'll see what I'm talking about with this. because I want to get to the Jewish law, because that's the more important part in many ways. Okay? Very clearly, religious activities are protected. In other words, to give an example of exactly what you're talking about, Arnold. April 11th, Federal District Court for Western Kentucky ruled that the ban of religious assemblies violated the Free Exercise Clause. Yesterday, in Kansas, federal court ruled that the Kansas governor's ban violated the Free Exercise Clause. The Free Exercise Clause guarantees that even in times of an epidemic, religious organizations can practice their faith under the least restrictive conditions placed on any organization or business. That does not mean that they can do things that other organizations cannot. So if an organization if it says that an organization can get together of 5 people and that's the maximum, then these laws do not protect the religious organizations from having 20, 30, or 6. Similarly, if there's a drive-through and people can gather in their cars waiting for delivery of food for Starbucks, or for Starbucks of 30 cars. You can't say 30 cars can be at Starbucks based on this, and 30 cars cannot be together staying in their own cars for a church service. Okay? So, if we look at, and again, this does not mean Dr. Levin, God forbid, was attempting to attack religion or people of faith. Please, please, please do not assume that. It only means that oversights can happen. But from the purely constitutional place, what has been going on across the board is every single lawsuit taken to federal court in a time of pandemic, without exception at this point, every single one, they're being told the bans are illegal. You must have the same rights to religion as the least restrictive other organization. Arnold, did you want to say something? You got to raise your hand, or I don't know. I just happen to. Can you unmute him, David, for a sec? No, you don't want to say.
I wasn't saying, no, I wasn't.
Oh, okay. I thought you were.
I will raise my hand when I do want to.
Okay. All right. So that's the legal perspective. That's what's going on in the courts, and the basis of any objection saying, look, we need to have the ability to do what we do, church or synagogue, subject to the same obligations as any other non-religious organization, the least restrictive definitions. This does not mean that you can have 100 people, but it does mean that based upon this, from just the secular side, if you can have 10 people in a bike shop, you can have 10 people in a church service. If you can only have 5 people in a bike shop or a real estate broker, you can only have 5 people in a church service. Okay, that there's this favored nations, at least a favored nations basis. Everyone got any other question? Everyone got that on just the legal? Are there any questions on the legal, on the secular legal part? Raise a hand if you have a secular legal comment or question. Okay, good. I'm done with that now. Makes me much happier. Let's look at Jewish law and Jewish perspective, because there's, how many remember in Fiddler on the Roof, Tevi goes on the one hand, and on the other hand, and on the other hand, and on the other hand, right? That's how Jews make law in Jewish law. We present multiple things. Now, for those of you who have taken the class on abortion with me, that may have come out on the class that I have taught on abortion, you've learned that it's a very hot issue and that there are all these different sides to it, and how do you interpret this, and how do you interpret that, and why do you interpret this, etc., etc. Okay? So first again, we've got to just create the framework, the basic foundation. We're on page 8. General halachic prayer obligations. Halacha literally comes from the word lalechet, meaning to go. It is what we interpret as law. Okay, so Jewish law. Regarding electricity, and this is an underlying thing to understand. Because there are certain categories that are discussed in Tanakh about what you cannot do on Shabbat, those have been extended into other laws. One of those laws that is very, very important in the Jewish world is the law of electricity. If you are an observant Jew you cannot use electricity on a holy day, whether it's Sabbath or another holy day. So for those of you who think our high holiday services, Sam lives very Orthodox, our cantor Sam. You may have noticed that he never picks up a microphone. We have to set the microphones for him. And he got permission from his rabbi for this purpose. Is it okay to, the rabbi he davens with over there, not his rabbi me, but his rabbi over there, is it okay to even use the microphone? And they discussed it, and the response of the judgment was that yes, it's okay if you're not moving in any way, shape, or form. If it just happens to be there. So that's why we have all those microphones set around him, so when he turns, it faces one way. You can't use electricity, you can't turn things on and off when you are an observant Jew. Now, some of you may remember your mother's or your grandmother's cholent, right? Rita's nodding. She remembers her cholent. Cholent is a food, because you can't light fire, that's where this comes from, where you would light it before Shabbos and it would stew all day and all night, right? But you can't turn on the flame on Shabbos. That's why we got cholent. So electricity is forbidden to be used on the Sabbath and other holy days. And this is a practice that is strictly kept by many observant Jews. We have to remember this halachic truth as we explore different possibilities of prayer, and especially as we discuss the option of live streaming. Live streaming on Shabbat, if you're an observant Jew, is a physical impossibility. Right? It prohibits the Jew who wants to observe the halacha of no electricity is unable to observe the halacha of being at the Torah reading. Everyone follow that? Give me a thumbs up if you understand that. It does not affect conservative or reform Jews. It affects specifically those Jews who are frum and who choose to say, we don't use electricity, so our choice is either break the halacha about electricity or break the halacha about our religious obligation. It is not an issue for our community. We use power. So that's not, live streaming is not an issue for us. But for the observant Jew, it is. And I want to just toss out something, and we'll talk about it later in more detail, but just something for you to be aware of. Thursday night, we had a last night Seder. We broadcasted from my house. Cantor Benny and I did the Seder. I don't know how many of you saw it or not. We had guests at the Seder. They were the stuffed animals of my two sons. Okay? And we had a last night Seder. It was a lot of fun. And we had that Suda Mashiach, the meal of the Messiah. And we did all that. Apparently, on the Pico Robertson area, the Orthodox part of LA, people were having lawn parties for 20, 30, 40 people. Okay? Because they were going to go celebrate. And apparently, there are many observant communities who are having minions. They're doing their prayer services. They're just keeping under the radar because they don't want to deal with any of this. But should they have to? That's a question we really need to wrestle with. Should they be allowed to or not to? Because the law is saying, as Ventura County is saying, that you cannot gather, prohibits them from doing certain obligations because they can't live stream. Everyone with me on that? Yes, David has a question.
Ken has a question.
Rabbi, real quick, can an Orthodox Jew be on a ventilator on the Sabbath?
Yes. Yes, and
so
we're going to, there you are, Ken. We're going to get to that.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to get to that concept. I'm just trying to lay groundwork, okay? Got to lay groundwork, like in any class you've been. We lay the groundwork and then we have the dialogue, okay? Let's talk about what a minyan traditionally is. A minyan is a group of 10 adults. In the Orthodox world, it should be 10 men. That is required for certain ritual obligations and recitation of certain prayers, okay? There are many sources for the requirement of 10. I'll give some of them here. But it is very clear that there are certain prayers, specifically Kaddish, Baruch Hu, Kedusha, Amidah, the priestly blessing, the public reading of Torah, Shiva ceremonies, and the 7 blessings of a wedding. Those all require a minyan. You're not allowed to do those prayers and those rituals without a minyan of 10 people. That is, again, a truth. With the current, again, we're only looking at Ventura County. The current Ventura County order prohibits a minyan from gathering. Right? Everyone sees that. That's not a question. They're saying you can't have a minyan. Which means you can't do these prayers in person as a minyan. So let's look at some of these prayers and rituals first, because it's easy to say they can't be done, but maybe they can be. Yes, is there a question? No, okay. So we're going to go over those in a minute, but the Mourners Kaddish, all Kaddish, you can have up to 6 Kaddish prayers in a ceremony. The Kaddish, we're not going to go into the theological reasons why, but the Mourners Kaddish is recited with the minyan, cannot be recited alone. The prayer itself is addressed to God. It's not addressed to God, it's addressed to people. So you can't say Kaddish by yourself, because the actual Kaddish is not it's not a prayer to God, it's a prayer, call and response back and forth with people. So it requires that community. The Mourners Kaddish is said at funerals and Shiva Minyanim. A Shiva Minyan is for those of you who don't know, is traditionally when someone dies, God forbid, their family, they have a Shiva Minyan, where there have to be 10 people for this service. They do it twice a day, and the idea is, in this Shiva Minyan, that people come over, they nurture the mourner, they bring food, you have prayer services that are directed and dedicated to the mourner. Okay? It must be done, it's what we do. And just so you know, the reason Jacob is able to, the Esau buys the beans, I don't know how many of you know this, Esau buys the beans, remember, from Jacob. Jacob trades him his birthright for that. The Midrash teaches that was for the Shiva Minyan for their grandfather Abraham. That was what the bean stew was for, and Esau didn't care about what was for his deceased grandfather, he only cared about himself, and this is why it shows that Jacob should have been the leader of the people. So this goes back to the beginning of our tradition, okay? We also say Kaddish on the yard sites, at least as often for our loved ones, at least on Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. The Kaddish prayer is so important for both the mourners and for the elevation of the deceased soul. You need to understand how deep this is important. If a parent if Mr. Poloni's wife, Mrs. Poloni, God forbid, dies, and Mr. Poloni and Mrs. Poloni's son Poloni, wants to say Kaddish for his mother, and his father says, no, you're not going to say Kaddish for your mother, the young man it's not just entitled. This is the specific example where he is supposed to disobey his father. Say, Dad, that's great, but I'm saying Kaddish. The commandment to say Kaddish, the requirement to say Kaddish, even supersedes obeying your father. That's how important Kaddish is in our tradition. Okay, everyone's with me on that. The Ventura County Order, by definition, prohibits any sort of recitation of Kaddish in a live form, because you can't have a minyan. Everyone following that? We're not talking about Zooming or anything else yet, but everyone following the concept that this document is prohibiting the assemblage of people to say Kaddish, let's say a Shiva Minyan, and to do it that way. Everyone follow me on that? I'm periodically going to ask for thumbs up. Everyone following that in terms of Jewish tradition, Jewish law? Okay. Sheva Brachot, the 7 wedding blessings. A minyan is required for the recitation of the 7 blessings. Okay? If you don't have the 7 blessings, does it even feel like a Jewish wedding? The answer is no, it doesn't feel like a Jewish wedding, but interestingly, in Jewish law, you don't have to have the 7 blessings for a wedding. You have to have a contract, an exchange of something valuable, and you have to make love. The contract's the ketubah, the exchange of something valuable, is the ring, and then you got to make love, yichud. Everything else is minhag, it's custom. So, the order prohibits the recitation of the 7 blessings. But it does not prohibit a Jewish wedding. A Jewish wedding does not require those 7 blessings. So don't think that this is saying Jews can't get married. It is not an attack on Jewish marriages, so we don't have Jewish children or anything. It's just not what it is, okay? It is because we can do a wedding without the 7 blessings. Although, would we want to? Okay? Everyone's on that one. The bottom, page 9. Baruch Hu, the Kedusha, the Amidah, and the priestly benediction. Each of these prayers, their content, their mystical understandings, their linguistic nature, they only can be recited publicly. The Baruch Hu is a call to worship. So why would you have a call to worship if you have, again, if you have a question, raise your hands. Why would you have a call to worship if you're by yourself, right? So you wouldn't do the Baruch Hu without a minyan. The Kedusha and Amidah specifically can be recited silently. You don't have to. They are call and response prayers. So you would never recite them publicly without a minyan, but you can do them privately. So what? Okay? And the priestly benediction, that's when we go like this, Yivrecha na Yishmerecha, not the Spock sign, but the sign of Kohanim. When we do that, again, it's from one person to another, so you would never do it by yourself anyhow. So the prayers that need this minyan to be recited publicly, they can be recited privately. And the county order, let's be clear, does not prevent us from saying those prayers. Okay? It does not prevent us from the Barclay or the Kedusha or the Amidah. It does prevent us from the Kaddish to do it in person. Everyone following that piece? Yes? Yes? Okay. If there's questions, you got to chime them in at some point. Let's get to Torah reading. We're in the middle of page 10. We're to publicly read the Torah 3 times a week, Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. This goes all the way back 2,000 years ago at least, with the Talmudic discussion, it's Masechta Megillah, and it can be traced back in one form or another to Ezra, who's 2,500 years ago. Okay? Additionally, we read Torah at very specific holiday times. Publicly reading. For many reasons, including the understanding of the power of the Torah reading, as well as the concept of Torah being a community event, as opposed to an individual, because at Mount Sinai it's given to all of us, a minyan is required for the reading of the Torah. Okay? You do not read it publicly unless you have the minyan of 10. Simple enough, not a big deal. A bar and bat mitzvah. Everyone when they turn 13 is a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. Bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah means a son or daughter of a commandment. It means you're an adult. You are an adult in the Jewish tribe. You have all of the rights and responsibilities and the voting privileges of being any adult. A father that once his child is 13, has no more say in the temple than the 13-year-old. That's what a bar mitzvah means. It also means that if you have the knowledge, you are encouraged and allowed, because we're all supposed to read Torah whenever we can, to lead the service, to read the Torah portion, and to give a Devar Torah, the bar mitzvah speech, today I am a man. All right? That's what a bar bat mitzvah is. You're reading the Torah from the scroll itself and chanting it in a traditional way. Okay? If you said you never became a bar mitzvah, that's not true. Everyone's a bar mitzvah if you're over the age of 13. You just haven't led the service yet. Now understand, again, each week we read a different Torah portion. It takes us 54 readings. And so if you're studying to read the Torah portion for yesterday, it is a different studying than the Torah reading that is going to be for next Saturday. Right? Since each week is a different Torah reading, it means the bar bat mitzvah is slightly different each week for the congregation, and especially for the young people preparing. By definition, since we cannot have 10 people in a room, you cannot have a minyan, you cannot read Torah, therefore you cannot have a bar bat mitzvah. So if you have, let's say someone had their bar mitzvah scheduled for yesterday, in Ventura County, and they were observant, the Ventura County would prohibit them from having their bar mitzvah. Forget about the party, we know the party, we postpone, but would prevent them from having their bar mitzvah on that day. Okay? Does prevent that. It does not prevent certain other prayers, but it does, by definition, prohibit from public Torah readings. We turn to page 11. Let's talk a little bit about Shiva Minyans. We talked a little bit about it, that these meals of consolation and prayer services, that we have these 2 services per day that are dedicated so the deceased, we believe it helps elevate the soul. That if we don't do these minyans, we don't do these prayer services, it's harder on the soul to be elevated, to elevate itself. Okay? We also do it on a very practical level. Raise your hand if you've lost someone dear to you that you love very much. Okay? You come home, let's say a man's been married to his wife for 60 years. He comes home, he goes to the funeral, which we can have 10 people at the funeral. He comes home, he may not want to eat, he may not want to do anything, because people are coming over and bringing him food, they're taking care of his physical needs. That's part of the purpose of a Shiva Minyan. It is not just spiritual, it is physical and practical as well. Another practical reason, besides the emotional support and container that the community brings for the mourner, is that it marks psychologically the time for the mourner. Let's say that the mourner and the deceased had lunch every Tuesday at a certain place. That Tuesday in the first week is the first time they won't. So it marks the time consciously for them. and it's the community supporting the person. So it has both a psychological purpose of supporting them. It has a physical purpose, the Shiva Minyan, because the physical purpose is that it makes sure they're eating, they're being taken care of. And has a spiritual purpose because we believe that it elevates the soul. Okay? Shiva Minyans are forbidden in Ventura County. They're forbidden. You cannot go, so if someone dies, God forbid, and their wife of 60 years dies, they can go to the funeral, 10 people there, socially distant, and they got to go home and be alone. Not taking care of their own physical needs, not taking care of not having a container or community to support them in their spiritual needs and their psychological needs. So Shiva Minyanim, by definition, are forbidden in Ventura County. And it's nice to say that, well, can we do these in a different way? But there is nothing like human-human contact. Okay? They are forbidden. I'm not saying they should or should not be. I'm saying they are. The law forbids it. And again, we're not talking about right now whether we should or should not. Now the discussion, now the discussion is only what is legal and what is not allowed. Arnold, you have another question? Yes.
Yes, I did have somebody pass within the past 10 days.
I'm sorry, I broke down in that. I'm so sorry.
We had 3 Shiva minions by Zoom with the rabbi who felt this was the appropriate way for it to be done.
We're going to get to that.
Food was sent over, and the psychological counseling and discussion and involvement was actually greater by this process than it would have been by people coming in person from work, wherever it may be. There was a greater turnout for this, and it seemed to be more supportive.
So we're going to discuss a little bit later why a rabbi can make that decision. Okay, so let me get to it. Jewish tradition is that there is no substitute for human-on-human contact. That does not mean that rabbi was wrong. Okay? We're going to get to that and why and how. But the first thing is to understand, in Ventura County, they are forbidden. Okay? They are forbidden. It's not a question. Okay? All right, let's continue on. Page 11, at the bottom of the page. In Judaism, it's not just Judaism. Theologians have a very simple way of defining the difference between Judaism and Catholicism. Okay? Both traditions want you to act righteously and have faith in God. However, if you can only do one, the Catholic Church says have faith in God because your faith, God will forgive you, you accept Jesus into your life, and that will lead to good actions. Our belief is, and it says in the Talmud, that we should instead have action as opposed to faith, and your good actions will lead to your faith. So we are action-based as opposed to faith-based. That's why I said at the beginning and say again, we need to give charity to places like the Food Care of Ventura County. Okay? We are action-based, not faith-based. We want both ideally, but we are action-based. Love for us is action. Don't say, I said this during the high holidays. Child says, I love the dog, but doesn't feed the dog, water to the dog, to take care of the dog in any way, then in Judaism, he doesn't love the dog. He's taking care of it, then he does. We are an action-based tradition. Okay? This is an important thing to remember. We need to remember that in Pirkei Avos, I'm on page 12 now, the Talmud teaches that the entire world rests on 3 things. Torah, which is the Word of God. Avodah, joyous labor, and Gemilut Chasadim, acts of loving kindness. Each of these are actions, even Torah, because studying Torah is an action, and how you live it and live in the words of Torah. And we must remind ourselves of Torah's teachings through the public readings of it. Otherwise, the action of Torah isn't there, so it's taking away one of the tripods. If you can't have the Torah reading, then one of the tripods of Torah Avodah Gemilut Chasadim is taken away. So we got to do the good deeds. We got to give charity. We got to study. We got to volunteer. And there's especially need for these good deeds again with food share. Okay, so let's look at some issues of compassion. Same again. This is just still the difference, all the different information, so we can have different dialogue. Jewish action requires us to be actively compassionate with others. You cannot be Jewish and not be actively compassionate. Empathy is not required. compassionate action is. Okay? Say, I feel their pain. Gornished, doesn't matter. What are you doing about it? Okay? Rabbi Israel Salanter, blessed memory, taught that, more important than how high I jump in the Kedusha is to make sure I don't land on my neighbor, on his feet. Right? He said, I need to worry about my spiritual needs, but I need to worry about the physical needs of my neighbor. Okay? So we are very much about compassion in action, not just in words. Now the county is allowing 10 people to attend a funeral. Okay? But how does that single person, the woman who's mourning her husband of 50 years, feel when she's got to go alone? And there are very few questions. Hey Matt, I just saw you there. Hey brother, where's Miles? Oh, there he is. Okay, just making sure. Miles is our musical director, Matt Gurman's bird. Miles is the reason Matt can't join him when we go away anywhere, because he's got to take care of his bird, just so you know. We got high priorities. She cannot sit Shiva. Now, Arnold, you make the comment you did a Zoom Shiva. It's not the same. And you may say that we had a better dialogue, there were more there, but it's not the same as human-on-human contact. And your proof of that is, when the time comes, which will come, God willing, soon, where you can have a Shiva minion or a Zoom Shiva minion, are you going to do it on Zoom or are you going to be there in person? It's a question for everyone to ask. Okay? What about a young person studying for their bar mitzvah? They spend months of training. How many of you remember studying for your bar mitzvah? Learning your Haftorah, your Torah reading, and all that, right? Study for 9 months. Let's say your bar mitzvah was yesterday. It was supposed to be yesterday. And you're told, the 9 months of study you did, you already do all the prayers. That's fine. You can translate that to July or June when we can have a bar mitzvah. But the Torah portion that you spent all those years studying, those months studying, the Torah speech that you spent all those months studying, forget about it. It was a waste of time. We're going to make you learn something new. Is that compassionate to a 13-year-old especially? Or in many cases, will the 13-year-olds say, well, the heck with that. I'm not going to learn something new. I already learned what I learned. Is this compassion? Is it leading to the perpetuation of our traditions? Obviously, the party should be postponed. But to say you can't have the reading, is that right? Okay? So as Jews, we got to look at all these kind of circumstances. There's also the comment that Bob Tyler made, which was that according to Ventura County, you can have 10 people at a funeral, so clergy are allowed to serve the dead, but they can't have 10 people for a bar mitzvah, so they're not allowed to serve the living. Interesting statement. Again, things to think about. So we got to look at all these circumstances and make every attempt to be compassionate, especially for people in life cycle moments like bar mitzvahs and mourners. We also, though, have to consider other factors. We got to consider the compassion, but what about general good, safety, health issues, Jewish respect for life, all these other factors? We got to consider those. If we don't, we're just fanatics and it's dogma. So we got to consider those things. You don't just get to say, we need 10 people for a minyan, it doesn't matter what's going on in the world. It's a dialogue, too many different arguments coming together. Okay? So I want to share a teaching that I've shared in email that I think is so important. It's from Barclay 61b in the Talmud, with the great Rabbi Akiva. So the evil government of Rome, the wicked government of Rome, decreed that the Jewish people were forbidden to study Torah. Papas ben Judah saw Rabbi Akiva convening gatherings in public and studying the Torah. Said Papas to him, Rabbi Akiva, are you not afraid of the government? And so Akiva answered with a parable, and this is the parable. A fox was walking along a river and saw fish rushing to and fro. Said the fox to them, what are you fleeing? Said they, the fish to him, the nets that the humans have spread for us. Said he, the fox to them, why don't you come out onto the dry land? We'll live together as our ancestors, my ancestors live with your ancestors. Said they, the fish to the fox, are you the one of whom it's supposed to be that you're the wisest of animals? You're not wise, you're foolish. If in our environment of life, the stream, we have cause for fear, well then how much more so in the environment of our death land? Akiva continued, the same applies to us today. If now, when we sit and study the Torah, of which it is said in Deuteronomy, for it is the life and lengthening of your days, such is our situation that is so challenging, how much more would our situation be challenging were we to neglect our teachings, our studying, our practices? This story illustrates the importance Judaism places on staying true to our practices, how important it is that we do not assimilate or give them up. But, even so, as we've said, we got to consider the other factors in Judaism. These are Jewish considerations of safety, health issues, and our respect for life as we stay in our stream. Okay? So here's the first one, and this is the one that is being used by many Reform rabbis to justify different behaviors. Okay? And it is a perfectly good argument. Let's be clear on that. This is not that one argument is right and one argument is wrong. Elu ve'elu. These words and these words are both words of Torah. Okay? We have a concept called pekuach nefesh, literally saving a life. In the book of Leviticus, it says, "You shall keep my statutes and rules. If a person does them, he shall live by them." It does not say he shall die by them. In Deuteronomy, it says, "The life and the length of your days." It does not say it will be your death. In Ezekiel, it says, "And I gave them my statutes, showed them my judgments, with it, which if a man do, he shall even live in them." Again, it does not say we should ever die by Torah, God forbid. And so from these and other quotes, and there's a lot of them, we know that our Torah teachings and our Torah practices that we're commanded to do is what keeps us strong and alive. But we also understand that these teachings to mean that we shall live by the Torah and not die by it. And it's based on that teaching, by the way, that in the times of the Holocaust, when a rabbi would be told by the Nazi, urinate on the Torah or I'm going to kill the child, what did the rabbi do real fast? Urinate on the Torah. It's horrible. It's painful for him. But saving a life is of paramount importance. It's called pekuach nefesh. We find the teaching about the power and importance of pekuach nefesh in the Talmudic tractate Yoma. Now, this is the tractate on Yom Kippur, so it deals with both the Sabbath and Yom Kippur, which is the Sabbath of Sabbaths. These are quotes. "How much more should the saving of human life suspend the Sabbath laws?" Rabbi Eliezer answered and said, "If circumcision, which attaches to only one of the 248 members of the human body, suspends the Sabbath." In other words, if it's the 8th day that the baby boy is born, he still has the bris on the 8th day, even if it's Shabbat, even if it's Yom Kippur. All right? The rite of circumcision is more important than the Sabbath. And so what Eliezer is saying, how much more so shall saving the whole body suspend the Sabbath? So if it's okay to forget about the Sabbath rules and have a circumcision, it's even more important to save a life rather than violate the Sabbath. Everyone follow that. Okay? This is pekuach nefesh. This is the idea that, you know what, if it comes down to observing Sabbath law or saving a life, it is not a controversy. It is not a contention or an argument. We save the life every time. Everyone got that? Raising your hand on that? Yes? Okay? This is pekuach nefesh. The text goes on, okay? When Rabbi Judah said, "Only ye shall keep my Sabbaths," in Exodus, one would assume under all circumstances. But the text reads only, allowing for exceptions. Rabbi Jonathan ben Joseph said, "For the Sabbath is holy unto you. It is committed to your hands, not you to its hands." It doesn't say you're holy to the Sabbath, you got to do what the Sabbath says. It says the Sabbath is holy to you. Therefore, we need to observe it by our understandings. Continues. "You profane for the sake on one Sabbath, so that you may keep many Sabbaths." You violate the Sabbath law to save a life, so that you can have many, many more Sabbaths in the future. Again, the idea the Torah decrees we shall live by them, not die by them. These are all from the Talmud. Okay? We're now on page 15. From these and other teachings, our sages developed the concept of pekuach nefesh, that saving a life is more important than halachic obligations. Following are examples of this, by the way. "Every danger to human life suspends the laws of Sabbath." These are quotes from the Talmud. "Extinguishing a fire, breaking a wall that has collapsed on a child, taking specific medicines that are required on Sabbath, and even Yom Kippur, if it saves a life, you are to do those things rather than worry about violating Sabbath law." And Mishnah even states, on Yom, if one is seized by a ravenous hunger, in other words, he's about to physically die from lack of sustenance, not only on Yom Kippur can he eat, he can even eat treif. He can have bacon if that's all that's around for him to save himself. Okay? That's how important saving a life is. It transcends all the other ones. Well, almost all the other ones, actually. We're going to learn that too. To understand how important this is, not just in Talmudic times, but how it carries forward. In 167 before the Common Era, the Hashmoneans, the Maccabees, they decreed it was permissible to fight on the Shabbat because they were at war with the Romans in order to save their lives and perpetuate Judaism. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein of blessed memory, who was the chief rabbi of North America throughout much of the 20th century, died in 1986. He ruled that it was permissible to break the Sabbath in order to travel and take a pregnant woman to the hospital. That's more important than saying, well, I can't drive on Shabbat. That's how important Pekuach Nefesh is, that we have to save lives. In 2010, there's an organization called Zaka. It's a bunch of Orthodox Jews out of Israel that go all around when there's a crisis. They're the first response team on the ground, whether it's an earthquake or tornado or a hurricane or anything else. If you remember the Hurricane Katrina, if you saw any photos of guys rescuing Torahs, that was some of the Zaka guys. After they rescued all the people, that was more important, obviously. In 2010, a Zaka Orthodox rescue team from Israel was in Haiti because of the earthquake, and on Shabbat, they recited their prayers and they went on back to working and cleaning. It's more important to do that than to observe Shabbos. So, it is clear from all these teachings and more, saving a life is more important than even biblical laws of observance. Everyone getting how important Pekuach Nefesh is? Yes? Thumbs up? Okay? This is more important is Pekuach Nefesh than a Bar Mitzvah. More important is Pekuach Nefesh than a Shiva Minyan. More important is Pekuach Nefesh than public Torah reading. More important is Pekuach Nefesh than anything else we do. Except, because remember we talked, Tevye has on this hand, on that hand, this on that hand. There are exceptions. We see them on the bottom of page 15. Our sages put limits and restrictions on what can really be considered Pekuach Nefesh, the saving a life by breaking a Jewish law. And here are some specific examples. An individual's life is to be saved. Must be specific, identifiable individual rather than an abstract and potential beneficiary. The Talmudic law is clear. Pekuach Nefesh does not apply if it is an unspecified or abstract or potential beneficiary. Pekuach Nefesh is only applicable when it is a single targeted individual, specific. So to say, this may kill anybody, no, that doesn't give you the right to break Jewish law. To say, God forbid, it'll kill Mr. Poloni, you better break Jewish law, because that's the Jewish law of Pekuach Nefesh. If a man is commanded to transgress and suffer not death, he may transgress and not suffer death. So if you're told you gotta urinate on the Torah so that a child may live, you do that. There are 3 exceptions to this: idolatry, incest, and murder. And incest, which includes adultery. From this we learn that we can break pretty much any other law in Judaism for Pekuach Nefesh, which has to do with a single individual, remember, not a potentiality or beneficiary, but a single individual. But from this we learn we can't murder, we can't commit adultery, we can't do idolatry. Even to the point if we have to die. We're not allowed to break those 3 laws, even for Pekuach Nefesh. So remember, Pekuach Nefesh is most important except in these cases. Again, it's the kind of thing. It is considered a crisis for the Jewish faith when a particular requirement within Jewish law is in danger of being outlawed by a government or other power, in which case we are not to publicly let go of the requirement. This is from Maimonides, Hilchot Yesodeh. In this case, we are not to publicly renounce our obligations. So, even for Pekuach Nefesh. So you get Moranos. They weren't being threatened in the same way, so they could hide, and they didn't renounce, they didn't have to do idolatry or anything else. But recently, not too long ago, a couple of different times in California, but most recently, I think in the city of San Francisco, they tried to make the Brit Milah illegal, the bris illegal. It was a proposition on the ballot, and then it was stopped. We don't get to say we're going to make the bris illegal. We still have to do the bris. Okay? We're obligated to still do the bris. Speaking of brises, so the National Moils Association, my friend Dr. Fred Kogan was at one point the head of it, I think, but on the board, they said, look, now for bris, you can't be having a lot of people, just have the immediate family. You still do the bris, but you have to have it. That makes a lot of sense to me. On the other hand, there was a mohelet, which is a female moil, which is kind of weird to me to begin with, honestly. It's not like a female rabbi, it's a female moil. It's kind of weird to me, but I'm old-fashioned, I guess, but if Mohel was very proud that she had a virtual bris online. It was the second day of the child's birth. It was still in the hospital, so it would be somewhere in the first 3 days. And the doctor did the circumcision, and she said prayers. Is that a bris? She was very proud, saying this is a bris. Is it? A question that you have to ask yourselves. Would that be okay as the bris for your son? I think Ken is about to ask a question. Is that correct? Ken, did you want to ask a question? David, can you? Wait, maybe I can. I don't know how to do it. David, can you unmute Ken? I saw his hand up. Ken Block?
Oh, good.
Okay.
So, Rabbi, this is like fundamental to this, to me, to the whole issue. Being the lefty I am, I've argued with my righty friends for a long time that the founding fathers couldn't have possibly conceived of the notion of nuclear weapons or even automatic weapons as the basis for the Second Amendment. So,
No, we're staying focused. No Second Amendment.
Okay, I want to understand, like, how when the concept of a minion requires or has always required personal presence.
Well, it's always, there was never an option until recently.
You know, so I get that. That's where I'm going. It's kind of like, how do I get beyond in my own mind the notion that this has been a wonderful hour and 15 minutes for me? I mean, I feel very present, very connected, very much able to communicate, very much here and now, and with you, and with everyone else. I'd like it to be like a hug. It's been 6 weeks. But beyond that, I don't know what to make of those two thoughts at the same time.
Okay.
When I think about 3,000 or 5,000 years of tradition.
So I
Don't get it.
I'm going to give you just a piece as we go on with this. Just one little piece. Okay? There are, from a Kabbalistic understanding, one of the reasons we do not say certain prayers without a minyan is our belief that our souls will leave our body and we will die if we have full intention. You can agree with it, disagree with it. But that is an ultra-Orthodox and that is the Kabbalistic traditional belief. And so that's, you want to be with each other. Someone who said to me, they were talking about AA meetings. And I've heard from numerous people in 12-step programs. And I've heard some say, this is more powerful doing Zoom AA meetings than even being in person. I've heard others say, this is ludicrous. You got to be there in person. So if you smell alcohol in their breath, you call them out on it. You can see by the way they're talking, moving, if they're using a substance. And it's not the same on Zoom as it is in person. I've heard both. Okay, I'm not in 12 steps, so I can't comment. David, you had a question from someone. David? David Boris, no?
Go ahead, Fred.
Hi, Rabbi, is it possible to sort of try to do a symbolic arrow around Zoom, like many of the Orthodox people do? I could possibly see that since we don't want to really break laws with Ventura County, and do a symbolic arrow.
The idea of an arrow is that you have an area that you can't go out of. There's a wire around it. I think there's an area of an agora, I think. But I'm not sure, 100% sure that, certain parts of it. But that doesn't bring you together physically. You're still not in a minyan. You're not in each other's presence. The issue is about being in each other's presence. We're not talking about breaking the law or not breaking the law. That's remember we talked about that. If you don't agree with the law, your responsibility is to try and change it. Okay? So we don't, what's not okay in America is the group of guys who say, well, we're going to do our minyan and we're going to do it under the radar. Right? Because that is both hypocritical. It's not standing for what you believe. It's not saying hineni and present. And they're breaking the law, and for what? You should be trying to change it. We don't live in an authoritarian, thank God, an authoritarian autocratic society. Let's continue on a little bit, though, as we're going on Pekuach Nefesh. Still got a lot more to go. So Pekuach Nefesh is a high priority, but is also considered a personal responsibility. It is not a responsibility for a community to take on. Say that again. Pekuach nefesh is not a community responsibility. Rather, it is accepted as the responsibility of each individual based on their own assessment of the situation. Here's the example. I say every Yom Kippur, if you're hungry, if you need to take your medicine, you need to take it. If a sick man chooses to fast on Yom Kippur, even if he puts his own life at risk, I'm not allowed to stop him. Okay? Because we don't inflict our choices of Pekuach nefesh on him. Got that? However, what the rabbis did is, they said, look, you want to eat, you don't want to eat, you don't want to take your heart medicine, you die because of a heart attack on Yom Kippur, we're going to bury you as a suicide because you did this on purpose. That's the most we could do as rabbis, is say, I can't make you eat. I can tell you you should, but you as an individual have to do it. So when there is a plague, and the rabbi gets up with a chicken leg on Yom Kippur, which has happened, many great rabbis have done that during different plagues, gets up, takes a bite of the chicken, says, look, you should all eat, I'm eating, we should all eat to stay healthy. If Mr. Poloni and his family, and Mr. Poloni and his brother, and whatever, they say, no, we refuse to eat on Shabbos, we don't think our life's at risk. Or on Yom Kippur, we don't think our life's at risk. I can't make him eat. He has to determine his own individual take on Pekuach nefesh. It is not for me to determine whether he is right or wrong. I can only determine for me. Okay, it's very, very important. We leave the individual choice to him because it's his life. All right, it's his life. So since Pekuach nefesh is based on individual understanding of risk, it becomes difficult to assess it accurately with regard to COVID-19. Okay? I see Jeff Klein's in there somewhere, back by his fireplace. Hi, Jeff. Okay, he's a doctor and a dear friend and community member. There's just not enough known about it. He and I have a conversation since this thing started, and the medical information is constantly changing. Right, Jeff? I can't see you. Give me a big wave if that's right. Okay, there we go. On the one hand, let's remember, a month ago we were told, the best medical science said, masks don't do anything. Then 2 weeks ago, you should wear a mask. It won't help you, but it will prevent others from getting sick because of you. And now we're being told you should wear a mask because it will both prevent others from getting sick if you're a carrier and it will help you stay healthy. So the medicine, the scientific knowledge is constantly changing. This is one of the challenges with this COVID-19 and the concept of Pekuach nefesh. So on the one hand, passing the virus is not based on a specific individual's risk. Obviously the exception is the old, the elderly, the sick. We know that they're at risk, and so they are forbidden. I called different people and said, look, you don't go to Shabbos. A friend who is an Orthodox rabbi, who his community has 20 guys, 25 guys, all over the age of 75, who come to every Torah reading on Shabbat. He canceled it because he knew that's not safe. These are clearly people in a demographic of risk. But the challenge is, because we don't know enough about COVID-19, and because what we do know is so vague and general, it's not based on a specific individual's risk. Okay? Therefore, the concept of Pekuach nefesh cannot be used to excuse the breaking of halacha. On the other hand, at the same time, because so little is known, maybe it is a specific risk for anyone present. So the question arises that if a person went to a service, God forbid, contracted and died from the virus as a result of being at the service, which you would never know because you wouldn't know if he caught it there or someone else, is that considered a suicide in violation of Pekuach nefesh? I'm not giving an answer. I'm saying, do you understand the multiplicities, the multiple variations of how you can view this? The issue of whether Pekuach nefesh applies to religious obligations during an outbreak of COVID-19 is not an easy question to answer with any form of certainty. Both sides of the arguments are legitimate. If someone says, this disease is general, so it doesn't pertain to Pekuach nefesh, I'm in good health, thank God, it doesn't pertain to Pekuach nefesh, I'm going to services. They are right in saying that. If someone says, this is general, but it's affecting people too much and individually, and we don't know, and it could put me at risk, so I'm not doing the halacha of Shabbat because of Pekuach nefesh, they too are right. Both sides are right. This is really important. Okay? I want to try and get through this. If there's an important question, we're going to get to questions at the end, but we still got a lot more and we've been going for a while too. We have a concept in Judaism called Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land is the law. In over 24 places in the Shulchan Aruch, the concept makes obeying the law of the land in which we live a religious obligation. Okay? In fact, Talmud even says, pray for the welfare of the government, for it were not for the fear of it, people would swallow one another alive. But the concept is limited in scope. Here are the requirements for the law of the land is the law. The government enacting the law must be one which is recognized by Jewish law as having a legitimacy. The law must apply equitably to all of the inhabitants, Jewish and non-Jewish alike in the kingdom, and the law must not contravene the spirit of laws derived from the Torah. Based on this concept, we see yet another perception of the county orders regarding religious gathering services. The government is recognized. Law of the land is the law. They are recognized. But it does not apply equally to all inhabitants as it now stands. It's a different law of gathering for business that Dr. Levin deems essential, like cannabis clubs, bike shops, real estate agents, sorry, Oren, than it is for religious gatherings. It is a arbitrary definition that applies to some inhabitants and not to others. Therefore, the concept of dinam machuta dina does not apply here. Okay? Until when religious observance is held to the same rights and responsibilities as these other organizations. And this is similar to the constitutional understanding we discussed earlier, that until when the religious observance is under the same rules, permissions, and restrictions as other essential businesses, this concept of dinah de malchuta dinah is not applicable. At the same time, however, this concept does apply and dictate that religious services cannot and should not, per dinah de malchuta dinah, be able to have more leniency than is given to other businesses. We don't get the special treatment of being better than another business. We get the special treatment, the protected treatment of no business can be better than us, better treated than us. Does everyone catch that? Raise your hand if you understand the differentiation. Raise your hand if you got a question on that. Any questions on that? Okay. So let's look at a Jewish conclusion. Strictly based on Jewish teachings and concepts illustrated above, there are obviously a lot of factors to take into account. But the most important, self-determining that religious obligations should be met or they should be postponed during this time. These are both legitimate understandings based on Jewish teachings. Okay? You have a great argument to say we should be able to have services. You have a great argument to say no one should in a religious service should gather. They are both legitimate arguments from a Jewish perspective. Okay? Whatever your personal, and I cannot make that clear enough. You can take the civil law and look at the Ventura County Order and compare it to constitutional law and our LUPA and First Amendment, and come to one conclusion. You can come to the conclusion of looking at just Jewish law. Well, I think it's specific people when you come together, so I don't think you should do it. Well, it's not specific, so Pekuach HaNefesh doesn't compare. Shiva Minyan, to not do it is not compassionate, not do Bar Mitzvah is not compassionate. Well, but it's saving a life. You have both sides of the argument have validity. You got to understand that. And you got to understand that wherever you stand on this argument, understand the opposing side's view. Because they elu v'elu. These words and these words we teach are both words of Torah. So we can have personal discussion, honest discussion. This sickness will pass, the destruction to relationships will not. The relationships that are getting destroyed because this person thinks it's okay to go play tennis and this person thinks it's not. These relationships aren't going to so easily be healed. This is what's more important. The sickness will pass. We need to respect each other and understand from a Jewish perspective. I'm not giving you some notes on the constitutional perspective, but a lot of notes on the Jewish perspective. We need to be able to say, from a Jewish perspective, I believe this based on Pekuach HaNefesh. From a Jewish perspective, I believe this. I think Pekuach HaNefesh does not apply, and I have an obligation to meet my obligations of a minyan in person. You got to understand both sides of it. Otherwise, we just tear our people apart. And that's the real problem. And that's, to me, the scarier part. The panic and the reactions are much scarier to me than the pandemic. I want to just toss out a couple of pieces of information. In Judaism, we have an obligation. Im ein ani li mi. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? We take this, and as well as other teachings, to understand that if something is not fair, right, if something is not right and righteous for our neighbor, we have an obligation to stand up for them. If blacks are being persecuted in the 50s and 60s, that's why Jews were at the very head of the forefront of the civil rights movement. We have an obligation, not a choice, an obligation to act on their behalf, especially if they are weaker, especially if they're a minority, especially if they're being picked on, especially when their belief or whatever else is being challenged, especially their religious practices. So I just want to share a couple of things, okay? So obviously this order is problematic for us. It is less problematic for our synagogue than it is for an Orthodox synagogue. And I got to tell you, I'm profoundly sad of my Orthodox colleagues whose reactions have been, well, we're not going to try and change the laws, we're just going to stay under the radar and still do our minions or our lawn parties of 30 people for the last night of Passover. I don't think that's okay. I believe that our obligation is to say we need to change the law so that you are allowed to have a minion, not more than a minion. If the bike shop can only have 10 people, you can only have 10 people. And you only need 10 people. But it's affected some of our neighbors, and I want to just share a couple of things with you. For you to think about, how do you feel? Drive-through Starbucks is considered an essential business. There's a drive-through Starbucks on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. Went by the other day, 27 cars parked there. Okay, in line. It's essential business. But when a church in their own parking lot had to do what they're calling a drive-through service, they had all people in the cars, in their own cars. They couldn't get out of their cars. And the service was going on in front. So it's the same dynamic as a Starbucks. They were shut down, the service was closed. I have a problem with that. Because the Starbucks is being treated one way, and the church is being treated another way. Now, you can all guess, I'm not a huge fan of, by the way, I've already gained my quarantine 15, just so you know, so I'm even less of a fan than normal of candy. But, Rita, you didn't have to get so excited and smile and agree so fast that I've already gained my quarantine 15 pounds. But in Ventura County, Rite Aid, CVS, and there are pictures, you will see them on page 19, I think. Yeah. You have the candy section here that you could buy your Snickers, and right next to it are the Easter eggs and Easter baskets before Easter. You can buy the candy, but all the Easter eggs, they're taped off with a sign by order of Ventura County. These items have been considered non-essential and cannot be purchased, or cannot be sold, excuse me. Similarly, I could personally care less about an Easter card or a Passover card. Rather you come share shmona matzah with me than have sent a card. But in the card section, again, there's a picture of it. The birthday cards, the anniversary cards, you could buy. And right next to them, the Passover and Easter cards were taped off. Ventura County has deemed that these are non-essential businesses or non-essential items and cannot be sold. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Easter cards. I'm not a huge fan of Easter candy. I still have never figured out how they get a rabbit to lay a colored chocolate egg. I don't get it. But that it's not okay that the candy is sold but the Easter eggs are not. It's not okay that birthday cards are sold yet Easter or Passover cards are not. This is something for you to think about, that you got to wrestle with, each person in their own way. And the whole idea of this class is hopefully you have tools, both legal tools of constitutional law, but also Jewish tools. What is our obligation or responsibility? Say, wait a minute, that's not okay. It's not okay. It doesn't affect me. I'm not buying an Easter basket one way or the other. But do I have a responsibility or obligation to try to protest that, to try to stop that practice? The most important thing to understand in all of this is elu v'elu. These words and these words are both true words. We need to respect and understand the people who we disagree with. Where are they coming from? You know, because it's been in the press. I personally believe that it is not okay for religious institutions to not be able to have our services of 10 people. It doesn't affect me particularly, other than when it comes to Shiva minions and Bar Mitzvahs, but I'm not okay with it. But someone who is, who says, well, but Rabbi, the discussion with someone earlier today, so, you know, their wife is truly an angel. She's just amazing. She's a nurse at Les Robles, an emergency nurse. And he's got this whole, his belief is that this is all for Pekuach Nefesh. And I respect that. And he respects where I stand. We don't agree with each other, but we respect each other. And this is the most important piece. May we all be blessed with good health and healing, prosperity, awakening, fun, love, and peace. May we come together in healing from the challenges that God has placed before us in this time. And again, I want to encourage everyone. Hopefully you give a little charity for tzedakah before this class. I want to encourage everyone, give that tzedakah or whatever else. Give something to the food share of Ventura County. The information is on this handout. And I think it is incredibly, incredibly important. Okay? Now, we'll open up. I hope that was a lot of good information. Thumbs up, side down, as I tell my kids. Okay? So I hope that was good information for people. If you have a question, a comment, now we can raise hands and David will unmute people one at a time. David, are you catching anyone? Because I obviously can't see everybody.
Carolyn, go ahead.
Yes, what happened last night with this ordinance?
Okay. So, for those of you who do not know, we've been studying what was the most recent ordinance. Last week, I was part of a group of clergy throughout the state. With attorneys, I was invited to be part of this group talking about religious freedoms. And it's happening in different places throughout the state. And a demand was made last week by a major religious rights attorney on behalf of myself and Pastor Rob McCoy that they need, and there's all the case law, it was this 8-page document. There are all these needs. You got to give the churches and the synagogues the same rights you're giving any other essential business. You do not have the right to call us non-essential. The Constitution protects us. That should be least restrictive, et cetera, et cetera. And my thought was, well, so they're going to get this, and they're going to say, boy, that was an oversight, and we're still going to let churches and synagogues gather as 10 people. If you have 10 people in a bike shop, why can't you not have 10 people in a shul? Just makes, there's no, and I guarantee you, our sanctuary is at least 5 times the size of any bike shop. And I'm very surprisingly, last night, Ventura County placed a new order where they made it now you can have 6 people together. They opened up the parks. Thank God they opened the golf courses, because my boys, as some of you know, are big into golf, and they've been going bananas, my 10-year-old twins, for the last month and a half. So this morning we were all on a golf course. I wasn't playing, I didn't play, but I was with them, you know, but they could play golf. And they open up other businesses. They open up car washes. And they specifically forbid churches and synagogues from using their sanctuaries or gathering as people. So that's what happened last night, Carolyn. And what the ramifications are, and what will happen as a result, as I guess we'll see. I was very surprised and extremely saddened that that was the decision that was made. And I think, again, unilaterally by Dr. Levin, because the orders come out from him. So it was very disturbing, because to me, I'd rather have 10 people in our sanctuary than 10 people in Costco. I just think it's safer. We disinfect everything. Everyone's got Purell, everyone's got latex, So it was very disturbing that they chose that. And that in their minds, I say they because it's him and the board supervisor, I believe, in their minds, religious services, religious practice is not essential. And they don't get to have that decision. And that was just, again, reiterated in Kansas yesterday, where almost verbatim orders about, where the governor had said essential versus non-essential businesses were knocked down by a federal judge, by federal court. Other comments or questions? So I hope that answers where we are in Ventura County today. But the golf courses are open, and your car washes are open. So, other questions? Raise your hand. Some of you had questions early on. Did this address the questions that you had? Fred, Arnold, did this address the issues? Yes, no? Okay, unmute Arnold, Dave.
Not completely, no.
Okay.
I mean, I do feel that there's a public responsibility and things may not be done in as reasonable and logical a way as one would want them to be if things were taking a long time to be decided. But when you have a pandemic and a silent killer that's killing people, I do not mind that they come down harder one way than the other. Quite honestly, Rabbi, one of my questions is, we have 50 people here. Can we see who agrees with the order and who doesn't? Would that be?
I don't want to put. We don't ever put people in pressure. That kind of pressure.
Oh, and it's not a question of pressure. It's just to
we don't do that. We don't do that. But what I will say, Arnold, though, is this: you side with Pekuach Nefesh that this is all an issue of Pekuach Nefesh.
Yes.
Okay, that is a legitimate side. Totally legitimate, and it's based on text. And someone can make the exact same argument based on the same text that it's not Pekuach Nefesh. So it's not to convince anyone as much as it is to understand that both arguments are legitimate and why they are legitimate. Luba, you had a question. I can see Luba and Michael have a hand up. David, can you unmute Michael and Luba?
Okay, I was thinking about this argument. As you know, we came from Russia, and growing up without religion, it's very different. And I think one of the issues right now is that a lot of us, and I thought at first it just was us who grew up without religion, but there's a lot of people in America who are, so far from God. And what I see is that, as Rabbi says, the more I learn about both sides and the deeper I learn Judaism, I understand that for the person who doesn't go understand what Judaism really is, it's hard to relate. And, it doesn't mean, and as Rabbi says, where you are, you sound to be right. But where there's more religious people who keep a Shabbat.
More observant person.
More observant people who keep a Shabbat, for them, it's essential. They cannot drive, they cannot run Zoom, and for them, it's very important. I can share my own experience short. We have two sons. First one, we did Bar Mitzvah in a very, I would say reform way. And then when Andy was growing up, he was 5 years younger, we decided, no, if we do it the right way, and went to Rabbi Sapo in Presley. So,
It's fabulous. Fabulous man.
You grow into it, and that's why it's so hard for some people to understand what's going on.
So I want to give an example of something that happened recently, which is at this synagogue, we are broadcasting everything Facebook and Zoom. Okay? Everything's available. And the sanctuary doors are open for anyone who feels the need that they should come. Okay? And I'm not going to say what family because I can see that part of the family is here. But a woman came to services and said, and we're not talking, by the way, I think that we had a total of 11 people in that sanctuary, including all staff. And she is, I'm not going to guess at her age, because her child is here, but I know she's over 60. And she came because her mother had died that week. And I, came up to her within 6 feet, and I said, I love you, I'm glad you're here, it's lovely to see you, but I really would be more comfortable if you would not be here. Because, your age, and I'm just letting you know I'd be more comfortable. Her response was how committed she was to saying Kaddish in person at a shul when her mother had died, as she committed that to her mother and to herself. I don't have the right to say you can't be here, in my opinion. Now, there are those who would say you have the obligation to say you can't be here. You have the obligation to close your doors. That's not where I stand. And when someone needs me to go to a funeral, well, you know what? I go to a funeral to officiate a funeral. There's 10 mourners. There's 4 guys working for the cemetery that are there. So there's 15 of us. How is that okay? But it's not okay to help this living woman who is in mourning for her mother. It's not to me. But that's my decision. Someone else could say, legitimately and fairly, no, B'kuach Nefesh, you shouldn't have your doors open, you should tell her to go home. And that would be fair of them to believe. I'm not arguing that that is their right, from a Jewish perspective. But they need to understand it is also our right from a Jewish perspective to say, no, we need to be able to have our minyan. Other comments or questions, and I know the family that was there, the family knows who I'm talking about. So, other questions or comments? People raising hands.
Well, so this is Ken again. I asked you earlier about, you were talking about electricity, and I asked you whether or not an Orthodox Jew could be on a ventilator on the Sabbath.
B'kuach Nefesh.
Yeah. So could you say more about that and then I've got something else to say.
Yeah, it's what we're talking about with B'kuach Nefesh. That it says you can transcend the laws, transgress the laws of Sabbath in order to save a life.
Then should that individual, assuming they were conscious, so then their choice to save their life by using electricity would be not in violation.
Correct. And in fact, if they said, I'm not using a ventilator, I would argue, and I know most Orthodox rabbis that I know and respect would probably go to them and say, look, use the ventilator or we're going to call you a suicide if you die during Shabbos.
Yeah.
I would tend to think. I don't know that, but I would tend to think that. And I prefer the word observant as opposed to Orthodox, just, I think it's a better word for it, but okay.
Well, I'm learning, so for me it's kind of a spectrum. But, so the thing I'm struggling with most in trying to understand not only this, fundamentally these issues, but how I want to behave is that I see these laws or Levin's regulation as being very transactional. At the end of the day, the only sense I can make out of keeping a pot shop open but not allowing me to go to temple is, you can't pass me the joint right now. So, and it's not required.
I prefer to stay out of their intentions.
Oh, no, but what I'm getting at is that the only way I could get medical marijuana or get marijuana is to go to the clinic. On the other hand, like with any education, as we're doing now, and I don't know where I cross over that line from education to kind of faith, it's that presence that I'm kind of struggling with, and why I asked earlier when that this is also novel, that we have the ability to communicate, allegorically, be with each other through Zoom and other technology. I'm just grateful that we can do this.
Well, look.
Would I step into the shul if I could see that virus transcending the 6-foot rule? Or the 10, it's also arbitrary. I don't know that I'd walk in there face to face just because I wanted to be closer to God, but I also don't want to violate this tenet of I need 10, any more than we didn't understand that we could be together 10 years ago, 2,000 years ago through Zoom. So I don't know where that.
So you got to look at the issues. The prohibition against the electricity is still true today. Okay, because it's based on the fire, on change of physical world. It's not a question. Okay, it's a prohibition, and the question of can you have a Shabbat service or can you have a Zoom meeting on Shabbat? You can't if you're very observant. The question is, do you transcend and just don't do the laws of Shabbat, and do you violate the law of your obligation to say the prayer, or do you violate the law of electricity on Shabbat? The electricity doesn't really change because that is forbidden. So I think there's also the piece that needs to be understood. There is no obligation. There's an obligation for every Jew to study. Okay? But there is no obligation that you have to study in person. Or there's no obligation that you have to study as part of a minyan. Okay? You can't say certain prayers without a minyan. But there's no obligation, there's no place that it says, I can't study this passage in Talmud without 9 other people. That doesn't exist.
Don't misunderstand me, and I don't mean to sound argumentative.
It's okay. You should be a Jew.
Where I get lost is if the Talmud is all about a living discussion, an understanding among rabbis and Jews with different opinions over 3,000 years. What happens when a technological godsend, like the internet, comes available? Do we just stop discussing?
No. So let me explain. So let me explain that, because maybe that'll help people too.
That's what I'm looking at.
All right, let me explain. Fine. Let me explain about judgment. So in Parsha Shoftim, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says you should go to the judge of your time and do what he says left or right. In Baba Metzia 59 in the Talmud, it talks about all the rabbis. There's one rabbi who says this is how the law should be. All the other rabbis say he's wrong. He says if I'm right, he does a bunch of miracles and says if I'm right, let God prove it. And they all hear the voice of God saying he's right. And they say, Lo Bashamayim He, it's not in heaven, stay out of it. And then right after that, they say, stay out of it, God. You have no business in this discussion. And right after that, Rabbi Meir bumps into Elijah and he says, Eliyahu, what was God's reaction when we said stay out of it? Lo Bashamayim He, it is not in heaven. And Elijah says to him, God smiled and laughed and said, my children have defeated me, my children have defeated me. From these documents, first Deuteronomy and then also in this piece from Talmud, we start getting the concept of what are called tshuvot, or responses. An issue comes up that was not dealt with in Talmudic times. Where do we make our decisions? We also, because of this, I need to keep you on mute for a sec, okay? So I can explain this, okay? Let me get through it. So they from this, we start getting responses, and we get to have, the reason we have a reform movement is based on this, that, well, these guys said this is how Judaism should be practiced today. And they based their decision on that it says in Deuteronomy, you shall go to the judge of your time, right or left. I am muted. Did I get muted? David, am I muted? No, okay.
No, you're fine.
Okay. It's also I was muted. So that's how we get the reform movement. That's how we have different denominations in Judaism. And that's what gives the right for a Reform rabbi to say, in our community, you can do this. It's what gives us the right to say, our Shabbat services throughout the year start at 7:30. Now, the sun doesn't set at 7:30 every Friday. We say during the year it's at 7:30, and we say it's at 7 o'clock on when we have our park services. Okay? That's what gives the right of the Rav of each community to do that. So, and of the movements, etc. And we have a history of when something new has happened, technologically, philosophically, whatever it may be, we have a history of rabbis making tshuvot. responses, legal responses. So I'm going to give you a great example. You've all heard probably that an observant Jew cannot drive a car on Shabbos, right? Raise your hand if you've heard that before. Okay? All right. And you've probably been told it's because you're creating fire in the engine. Raise your hand if you've been told that before. Okay? It's creating fire, can't create fire, so can't have Shabbos. Okay. Except if I have a diesel, there's no fire and there's no combustion. Therefore, can't I drive a diesel on Shabbos? The answer would be, if it's only because of fire, the answer would be, of course you can. But that's not the reason. When the cars first came around, they were called what by everybody? They were called horseless carriages, right? So the rabbis had to determine, as soon as the first horseless carriage shows up, can you drive it or not on Shabbos? Now, since you can't drive a horse, you're not allowed to work your horse on Shabbos, right? The animal gets a day off. So based on that, they said, well, you can't drive on Shabbos either. Okay? So, and now we say it's because of fire. I think that's actually the history of my understanding, where the history comes from of making that shua. Because you can't, so there are laws in different communities being made around, can you use the internet to do A, B, C, or D? Maybe it's okay to have a service, but you can't say those specific prayers that need 10. Maybe that's a decision in one community. Maybe another community says, you know what, we can do everything all online, and in fact, if there's a bar mitzvah, we're going to have mom and dad and the kid and the rabbi and the cantor. We're going to do the bar mitzvah like that. Of course, that would have been illegal as well last week, according to Ventura County, because you can only have 2 people. But maybe they said that. Maybe they're going to say, you know what, we're going to cancel things. Or maybe they're going to say, you can't even do the bar mitzvah. All of those are legitimate arguments, but they got to be based in the text. Does that make sense to people? So they have to be based in a feeling. So when someone says the Shiva Minyan is going to be done via Zoom, they're basing it on this concept of pikuach nefesh. When someone says you're not going to have a Shiva Minyan, you can't do it on Zoom, it doesn't count, they're basing that the pikuach nefesh does not take place, that you have to do in person. Okay? And does that help you a little bit, Ken?
It helps me to the extent that there's more room than I do to make the decision.
Look, I will tell you, one of my real issues with this law, as it stands, is I think that on besides the issue to say that anything is more essential than prayer, because I don't think anything is. That's where I stand. But beside that, I think the idea of saying here's a maximum of people per room is one of the most foolish language mistakes that you could make. Because there's just, 10 people in this room would be crowded. Some of you have been, we're in our dining room right now, and when we've had 15, 20 people studying here, you know how crowded it is, right? The same, let's say we had 15 people, it's crowded in this room. The same 15 people in our sanctuary, it's empty and everyone's 25 feet away. So the idea of defining by room, I think, is a huge, huge mistake on Dr. Levin's part. It would make a lot more sense to me if you said you can have each person per square foot, however many square feet. That would make sense to me. Arnold's nodding his head on something. Did you do what? No, he's talking to his wife. Are you talking to your wife? Okay, you're talking to your wife. So you just have him in the corner. You're right next to me, so I see you easily. So, and let me ask, what about AA meetings, right? Are you going to tell me that you can't have the 10 people, let's say, in a hall, in a big room, as opposed to, so the size of the room, I have a real problem. I think that much of this document of the Ventura County order, I think was done haphazardly and carelessly, probably because they're so overwhelmed with so many different things trying to juggle. I hope that's the reason. But I think that it could be done a lot more carefully and a lot more clearly if someone said this many people per space, as opposed to Pastor McCoy, Rob McCoy, has an 18,000 square foot sanctuary. He had 10 people in it. That's all. That's a lot of room per person. And someone said to me, but Rabbi, the Orthodox yeshivas in Crown Heights, they all closed down. Well, you know what? If you've been to some of those Orthodox yeshivas where they got a small room of 20 by 20, they got 100 guys in it, arguing, yelling, elbow to elbow, spitting and yelling at each other, it's not sanitary on a good day, let alone when there's a sickness. God bless them for what they're doing, that they're studying and they're committed. But we got to be more conscious of that. I saw a hand over here, right there, right? Ophira?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being had.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not in Ventura County, so I have 2 points. I'm surprised that if Dr. Levin made this mistake the first time, the second time he made the mistake again, along with the Board of Supervisors. So now it's not a mistake, in my opinion. And then the next comment is, as lovely, I'm going to do this again, as lovely as Zoom is, it's like being an engineering student and now you're not in university and you have to do all your classes at home. It only satisfies a part of your education, but you still need to get together with your team in real life and build the machine. There's some things that are not easily replaced, and even though this is fascinating, I would love to talk to you afterwards or nudge my neighbor. So
or heckle.
This is a heck, right? This is like a 60% solution. It's not a replacement at all. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's one of the issues about this being the issue of David's got this being the issue of what a minion is, what's needed for a minion. David, you had someone you wanted to unmute. I saw your hand. David, Boris.
Mine is unmuted.
Hey, Fred.
Rabbi, so by the same token, would it make sense that if hypothetically you have 15 glass walls in the sanctuary, making a room, can you have 30 people in there? If it's like 2 people per room?
Are you asking the question, according to the material law, if we had separate rooms that were glass and 2 people in each of them, would they be okay with it?
Yeah, would that make it legal?
I don't know. I would tend to think there'd be an argument one or the other. I don't know. That would be a question for lawyers. Okay,
thank you.
I don't know. That's my problem with defining it as a room. I just think that's a really bad definition. Other comments or questions? David, can you see everybody? Because I can only see 20, and I know there's a lot more than that. Can you see everybody?
I'm moving back and forth.
Okay.
So far, no one has their hand
Okay.
raised that I see.
All right. Well, we've been doing this for 2 hours.
We have one.
Oh,
Luba's raising her hand.
are you sure that wasn't Misha's hand? Where's Misha's hand?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Misha stepped away because he's taking care of his mom. We actually had to make a decision to bring her over to our house to be safer. So he's with his mom right now. The comment I want to make is that I think to the last question I think it depends on the definition of essential business. My son, my older one, he works in San Francisco in a startup, and their business is not considered, it's the chemical business, chemical engineering. And it's not considered essential, but they're actually working right now, like 2-3 people in a big room, just to give an idea, but I'm not sure like they're reading all the laws. So I think when we talk about how many people, etc., it's still tied to that essential definition, right?
Yes. It's right now it is tied. We are considered non-essential, so we do not even get our 10 people. Correct.
Right.
Jeffrey Klein, are you still there? I'm curious if Jeffrey. Do you have any? Jeff is a doctor, so he's a medical professional on the front line of everything. And I'm just curious if you had any comments, Jeff. He waves, but I can't see him.
I do, but I'm trying to stay out of the medical stuff. One was if you're saying that it would be a person's choice on their own health if they were to attend or not based on their own risk factors. My question is, it's more than that. It's how is it on them affecting other people, because one of the things, as you know, a lot of people are potentially sick and asymptomatic, infected and asymptomatic, and by going to the sanctuary and praying, and then leaving, they're potentially infecting a lot of other people. So how does that fit into this?
This goes back to our discussion of Pekuach Nefesh. It goes back to the discussion of, is it a general or specific threat? Do you interpret it as a general or a specific threat? And so the one rabbi would say, well, they're threatening everyone. Therefore, we need to cancel because anyone could be carrying it to anybody else. So it is a large, specific individual threat. And another rabbi would say, no, it's not, because it's not, you can't demonstrate that any one person is specifically at risk, which is one of the requirements of Pekuach Nefesh. And again, elu ve'elu, both are right. This is not about one being right and one being wrong. You got to remember that. But it is about decision. We use power in our community. For us, that's a no-brainer. But you know what? For a lot of other communities, that is, it's a shanda. We're not right. They're not right. Or I'm going to phrase that. We're not wrong and they're not wrong. Judaism is not monolithic. Elu ve'elu, these words and these words. And, I was not comfortable with the woman who came in because of her age, who wanted to say Kaddish for her mom. Because anyone could, God forbid, be carrying it and transmit it without us knowing. She chose she wanted to be there. There are some who would say that the rabbi has an obligation to say you can't be there. I go on the other side where I'm not willing to say you can't be.
And I agree. The problem is you see who comes in. You don't see who they're exposed to,
Correct.
Who they're living at home with, etc. And that's my concern, is one person beyond them. And I agree that it is not that specific risk that you're talking about, and it is that the alternative interpretation. But it's beyond the people who are actually there at the shul praying.
So let me ask you, Jeff, a question, okay? How do you feel about 10 people being in a bike shop?
I actually don't like that either, and I think that the bike shop, for instance, that my family would go to doesn't have anybody go in, or has one person at a time, where they come out and are serving one customer at a time. So I agree that the initial premise that churches and synagogues should not be treated different or any worse than other businesses. I think that there are a lot of other businesses that are probably not being as safe as they should. On the other hand, I actually think that we have a right as leaders in the community to set a high standard for what is appropriate and taking care of our community. And if the bike shop is not doing the right thing, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the right thing.
Look, I think you're right. I think all that you're making, and there's intellectual consistency with what you're saying, which I would suspect would be the case with you. So it's a good thing. If Dr. Levin said that, you shouldn't gather more than 2 people, period, and the only people who should are people who are really needed for the health care, I think we're having a different dialogue than saying that the cannabis club, and by the way, you can't get your pot ordered, because I know someone who told me today that they have prescription marijuana because they've had cancer. And they told me today they don't go to a cannabis club, they have it delivered every day when they need it. So to say that the cannabis club can have 10 but the church cannot, that's I got a problem with. I really do. I have an issue with that idea, or that the bike shop or the real estate agent. I'm a little concerned the real estate laws are that you can go do a showing, You can't do an open house, but you can have 2 people by appointment. So you could have 25 appointments in the day of 50 people going through a house, sneezing, coughing, touching. That concerns me, you know? But the big piece here is for everyone to understand, elu v'elu, both sides, all of it, there are legitimate dialogues on all sides. If you believe no Orthodox shul should be able to have a minyan, there's reasons to do that. And if you believe that they should, that everyone should be able to do, we should be able to have Shiva minions, which, you know, that's a big one for me, then that's legitimate too. I will tell you, as clergy, the only place it personally affects me, because we do our services on Facebook Live, as you guys know anyhow. Hopefully some of you were on our Passover. Raise your thumb if you were at our Passover last night Seder last week. We had a lot of fun. Where it affects me as clergy is specifically bar mitzvahs and Shiva minions. And I do have a problem that they're saying you can go to the funeral, but you can't go back and be the Shiva minion. I don't think that's okay. Those 2 places, it directly affects me as clergy. The rest really doesn't affect us that much as a community in terms of what we're doing. I will tell you though, I started off saying this earlier on, you would not believe the vitriolic hatred, email and phone messages I have received over the last few weeks. Again, in many cases from people whom I have really been there when they have needed, way above and beyond any expectation. Vitriolic. As well as people I don't even know. I mean, when we said we were still going to keep the doors open for anyone who needed, and by the way, that Shabbat, we had 6 congregants and clergy there. Okay? And it was before this order came out. I got an email from some woman, profanity laced, all in capital letters, talking about how, basically putting me next to Satan. She's on the front line, etc. David, Boris, and I looked. She's not even in our database. Someone had forwarded her the email, and she had reached out to just write nasty things to me. Like all people, I emailed her back and said, "Look, I'd love to talk with you about it, especially given that you're a doctor and you're on the front line of all this." And then looked her up, because again, when I found she wasn't part of our community in any way, and found out she's actually a rheumatologist in Burbank who had reached out, someone had sent her an email, who reached out to a rabbi she doesn't know to just spew hatred. That's not Jewish. We can agree to disagree. That is Jewish. We can say they both have legitimate arguments. That is Jewish. David? David, you have...
Rabbi, just to say...
Wait, Debbie, your hand's up too, okay.
Yeah, it's me. It's Ken. I had to make a choice between Netflix and this tonight. And notwithstanding boredom, this has been remarkable. And hanging there, notwithstanding any opinion, it's good that we've been able to have this discussion. I wish more people could do this. I think it stimulated me to think a lot more about how I would want to behave in my own, in my own regard, and that's as much as anyone can expect. These are really difficult decisions, and as a matter of government, it must be just beyond belief to tell 900,000 people how they should behave in the context of a deadly pandemic. You just can't say, only go to page 1.46a on Tuesday, and then check it again on Wednesday to see what the right thing to do is based on our knowledge. So we're all struggling with it, and this has been wonderful. I mean, it's added a dimension that I really appreciate.
Thank you. I will tell you, I felt a lot better about... I have not felt good about the county order since last night. Because as Ophir said, I can say it was an oversight before, but it's not an oversight now. Debbie, I know you had a question.
Yeah, I just, throughout all the discussions, it just seems like everything is weighted against our physical health, where mental health seems to be disregarded in all of this.
And our spiritual health.
And and our spiritual health. And for me to maintain my spiritual, to maintain my physical health, the government has restricted everything I do to maintain my emotional well-being, my spiritual well-being, and all of that is it dictates whether I can maintain my physical well-being.
Right.
So isn't it my choice, living in a free country, to choose what I feel is more acceptable risk to me?
Jewishly it is. Jewishly, that's it.
To me, if everybody has the choice to stay in their house and be safe, shouldn't I have the choice to be able to do what I need to do to take care of my soul? Who is it to tell me that piece of me isn't essential? And I can tell you, I love Zoom, and all of this is wonderful, and innovation is great, but it's not a substitute for being someplace in person. There are a lot of times people will call and ask how I am, and I'll say I'm fine, and they can't see the look on my face. And that's something that you get when you're in community, and this doesn't do this. It's great that we have it, but it can't be. It's not a substitute.
It's not, and at the same time, the question that Dr. Jeff Klein posed is a valid one too. That someone says, well, for my physical health, I need to get out, but they may be carrying it and not know it. And that's a legitimate argument from Pekuach HaNefesh as well. And we need to respect that is an argument. Again, I side with the place personally that it's not specific enough. I wouldn't have 20, 30, 40, 50 people in our synagogue, but for me, if you can have 10 anywhere, the first place you should allow 10 is the minyan in a synagogue. But look, obviously, faith, God, these are important things to me. These are the highest of my children. I'm sure part of it. These are my values. Not necessarily if I was a different profession, and I recognize that. So we've been going for over 2 hours, which is pretty terrific. Other questions or comments, any, before we finish? Then I'm going to ask that everyone have a really safe time. Please keep yourself safe. You saw me drinking it. I want to recommend to everyone to either get Emergency or Arrow. They're powders you can put in your water that have vitamin C. They have all sorts of things for your immune system. And to really take care of our bodies, now that parks are a little bit more open, to take that hike when you can, and to take care of your bodies and with each other, especially you, Joanna, because how are you doing? I want to see. Can I see? Oh, look at that. Look at that. B'sha'ah tovah. What do we do? What? For those of you who don't know, Joanna and Josh got married not too long ago, and they're pregnant. What do you do? What do we do?
July 23rd.
Okay. That's fair.
But the whole discussion is, what do you do about the circumcision right now?
You get them oil.
Sorry, but
You get them oil.
Well, yeah.
You get them oil, and the Oils Association is very clear. You get them oil at 8 days. Do we know it's a boy?
Yeah, we're waiting for birth.
Okay.
Gender.
And if you get them oil, and you keep it to immediate family. I mean,
Family can make it.
yeah, you don't, and then you have a big party for when they do their 3-year haircutting. That's all.
Yeah.
You just have you have the parents and someone to be the sandak, and you have them oil. That's all. That's all you need. Are there any other comments or thoughts? Then I thank all of you guys for doing this, and for being here, and for being part of this. And let me see if I can. There we go. And hopefully we will all see each other in person soon, and we can study. We have class tomorrow night. We have class Tuesday and Thursday at 1 o'clock. We're moving really quickly through Judaism 101 because there's not as much dialogue. And then Wednesday we have a lunch and learn, and we have all that. And then Friday night we have Shabbat services. I encourage everyone to watch them on Facebook Live. And if you feel the need to come, the doors will be open to be doing that. So I thank all of you for doing that, and a Laila Tov, and a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful evening. Please be safe and study. And if you have questions, you can email me. I think it probably is good for everyone to send this information to your friends too, and say, look, there are legitimate arguments on both sides of the fence, and just because someone feels this way or that way, they're not a fanatic on either side. That we say elu ve'elu. Thank you guys all for doing this. It's very kind of you. I hope it can be turned on and shared. And again, thank you so much. And Lila Tov.